Our county has more churches, abbeys, priories and cathedrals collectively than any other in England.
Wow, extraordinary.
Some built with strong Norman influences and developed in the 11th, 12th and 13th centuries.
One of the first features you see when you come into this wonderful church is this font, which must have so much history.
On my journey around Norfolk, I consider the position of these buildings today and what part they play in our community in the 21st century.
When you come into this area of the cathedral, you see how monumental it is.
From the splendour of Wymondham Abbey and its exquisite altar screen and delightful angel roof, I head further south towards the edge of our fine county to the market town of Thetford. The Priory of Our Lady of Thetford was one of the largest and richest religious foundations in medieval East Anglia. Founded around 1103 by Roger Bigod, a close associate of William the Conqueror, he laid the foundation stone of the priory on the 1st of September 1107. It was affiliated to the great Benedictine Abbey at Cluny in France and was built on a magnificent scale in the rich architectural style typical of the Cluniac order.
The building works followed a typical monastic layout, very similar to what you'll see at Norwich Cathedral. Centrally here were the cloisters with covered walkways. Off those covered walkways was access to the dormitory, to the church here on my left, to the refectory or the dining room, and then to the chapter house, which was the main meeting chamber of the community.
From the mid-13th century, the Priory Church was home to a miracle-working statue of the Virgin, which became a popular object of pilgrimage. The cult brought considerable financial reward to the priory, and before the end of the century, the whole east end of the church was rebuilt on a more elaborate scale. The Great Gatehouse is today the most perfectly preserved of the medieval priory buildings. Built in the late 14th century, it was the principal entrance to the walled precinct of the priory. A fragment of this wall survives to the left of the building. The three-storey building stands intact apart from its floors, roof and parapet and remains almost unmodified. It had octagonal turrets at the southeast and southwest corners and is faced with flint and finely cut stone dressings. At each corner there are large projecting buttresses, one of which contains a stair to the upper floors.
Then in 1536, with the priory threatened with dissolution, the staunchly Catholic 3rd Duke of Norfolk petitioned King Henry VIII to turn it into a college for secular canons. He pointed out to Henry that in the church he was not only preparing his own tomb, but one also for Henry's own illegitimate son, Henry Fitzroy, who was the Duke of Richmond, the only illegitimate son that Henry VIII ever admitted to. But the petition to the king failed, and on the 15th of February 1540, the last prior and 16 monks surrendered to the king's commissioners.
The prior's lodging continued to be occupied as a house for another 200 years, undergoing further alteration during this time, but by 1820s, however, it was a roofless ruin. And today, Thetford Priory is sadly a ruinous site with few remains standing to any height. The fragments that have survived are a little more than eroded lumps of barely recognisable structures, showing nothing of their former ornate glory. The rest consists of column bases, reconstructed stone altar bases, and a few scattered relics.
It is worth reflecting that both Wymondham and Thetford were built at about the same time, both Benedictine priories, both well connected with established monastic orders, both adapted and extended throughout the Middle Ages. But then you compare Wymondham, that continued to use the nave of its church for the local community, had the blessing of Queen Elizabeth I when she visited the town, and the 19th century restoration, with that of Thetford Priory, which in 1540 closed. And when it closed, it literally closed. And this is what's left. Nothing more was done.
As I drive northwards through our county, heading from Thetford to the North Norfolk coast, I'm reminded of the words of the poet John Betjeman, who wrote, "Norfolk would not be Norfolk without a church tower on the horizon or round a corner up a lane. We cannot spare a single Norfolk church. When a church has been pulled down, the country seems empty, or is like a necklace with a jewel missing." No county in Britain is richer in its historic churches than Norfolk. There are over 650 of them, every one of them with a treasure to discover and a fascinating story to tell. And today I'm stopping off at one that perhaps you may not have heard about, and certainly won't find that easily, as it stands alone long after the demise of the village around it, which is now just fields.
I'm about 4 miles southeast of Swaffham. I'm south of North Pickenham. I'm north of South Pickenham. It's a sort of middle Pickenham. And it's called Houghton on the Hill.
There has been settlement in the area since at least the Roman period, with harder evidence supporting an occupation during the Bronze Age. The now deserted village sits just to one side of the Peddar's Way, close to the River Wissey, and although the first mention of a church on the site is to be found in the Domesday Book of 1086, it is believed that the origins of the church date back to the Saxon period.
So why have I brought you here today? Well, about 24 years ago, one man had a sole campaign to repair the church and to restore services to it. And during the initial repair work, traces of wall paintings emerged, and their potential significance was soon realised.
The rarest Saxon wall paintings in Western Europe, over 900 years old, and they're right here in the middle of Norfolk, conserved thanks to the brilliant Bob Davey.
So wonderful to be here, and it's been over 20 years since you started the conservation on this church. What condition was it in when you first saw it?
It was in a dreadful state. You couldn't see the tower for ivy, top to bottom. There was no floor, no roof, no east window. That had been ripped out and sold by the locals. It was in the last stage of falling down, really, yeah.
So the first task you had then was to, I suppose, clear this garden area.
Yes, it was. The task that went with it was to provide an access to the church. I managed to get part of the land off the local landowner, and I built myself a road.
The church was in such a state that actually there was a demolition planned.
Yes, it was. Now, what was even worse, when I got the ivy off the tower, I found the tower had split. And that happened when a Zeppelin dropped a bomb beside the tower in October 1916, and it was never repaired. The two halves of the tower were parting company. Now, this is where the paintings come in, because patching it up to make it safe for a service, some plaster fell off and there were traces of wall paint.
Right.
So you could say, no bomb, no painting.
And as a committed Christian, this must have been an extraordinary moment for you when you realised what it was that you were looking at.
It was.
What has been the general reception that you've received from people when they understand that you are the man that started the work 24 years ago?
Well, they think it's a fabulous job that I've done. That sounds like self-praise, but they are very, very good on that about this. They do congratulate me on what I've done. We've had Princess Margaret here on Sunday afternoon, Prince of Wales. I've had 2 audiences with the Queen. I've got an MBE, the only time it's ever been given for church restoration. The Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. Now, they came and had a look and decided that it was worth a conservation award here. But the problem with that year, which was 1998, I've been at it 6 years by then, there were 2 buildings running in for this one. So they decided, unusually, to make it a joint award that year. The second one also got the Conservation Award, Windsor Castle, after the fire.
you've been commended for your work. You've
Yes.
had audiences with the Queen, and you've seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people come through.
Uh-huh.
And you still enjoy coming up here every day and meeting people and discovering their stories as they discover your stories.
Yes, I do. But I'm still learning myself. You go through church history, there's a lot of it.
Wonderful. Well, Bob, I'm really looking forward to seeing inside of the church. I've not seen it
Right.
yet, so please, I'd be delighted if you would be my guide.
I will.
Thank
With
you.
pleasure.
The discovery of the Romanesque wall paintings at St Mary's was hailed internationally, for indeed they are rare across Europe. Much of the importance stems from their very early date. Certain images and the architecture of the church indicate a date of circa 1090.